with the U.S. kidnapping of President Maduro of Venezuela. But I do have a question about why then he's going to. I mean, there's all these other distractions that he could focus on. As you said, just focus on Venezuela or focus on squeezing tariff out of India. Why is he then going after Greenland? I mean, that doesn't make sense. If you want to be the hegemon, you want to get more people on your side, build up your alliance to shore up your position. But Trump looks like he's single-minded to destroy NATO, to destroy the one institution that lock in the Europeans as the American vassals. And he is going after a NATO country, Denmark, the owner of Greenland. And when U.S. already, all this reason they throw out for why U.S. need to acquire Greenland, because Greenland sits on a very strategic shipping lane, because it sits on the Iceland, UK, Greenland gap. You can monitor the Arctic when the ice melt. We can deter the Russians and the Chinese shipping, in the Arctic from the bases in Greenland. But all that excuse is bogus, because currently U.S. already have access to Greenland per agreement with Denmark, per agreement with NATO. They can do all that right now. So why is it that he was dead set on acquiring Greenland while antagonizing a NATO ally and potentially turning Europe against him? I mean, like the Europeans leaders already, they all despise him, but they still have to scrape and bow because American power. But now they're really, I mean, the Greenland might just be a bridge too far, taking away a sovereign territory of a NATO country. What do you think is the reason he's doing that?
Well, Carl, first off, he doesn't care about Europe. He sees them as weaklings. He said so on many occasions. So the idea that he takes them seriously is there. I mean, you can see a very clear pattern. Any country that stands up to him, all right? Oh, he's like, oh, can't we be friends? We can work this out. China, Russia, the mayor of New York. People always ask me, Einar, why is he so nice to a guy who called him a fascist? I said, it's very simple. The way Donald Trump thinks, he's vindictive, if you haven't noticed. And, if he was mayor of New York and he didn't like the president, and the president had a whole bunch of real estate inside New York, Donald Trump is very well aware of what he would do, which would be to send an army of inspectors on a daily basis to every single one of those properties to find some excuse to shut them down, to fine them, etc. It's the only reason that Donald Trump did it, self-interest. And that's the only reason he does anything else. In terms of Greenland, he really sees himself carved in the rocks of Rushmore. He even has a couple of mock-ups of him on there. So he's looking for this big thing. Okay, so I grab South America and I grab Greenland. I control the Western Hemisphere, and I will be in the history books as the greatest president, or more important to him, a better president than Obama. I mean, there was a real turning point when Obama made fun of him at the Gridiron Dinner, the annual dinner where they get together and they make jokes about each other. Donald Trump was looking, oh my gosh, he was so embarrassed at that. And it was widely reported that was the moment he said, I'm going to be president. I don't care what it takes. I'll do whatever it is. I'm going to make this bastard pay. And that's quite clearly what he's done since that point. So yeah, from his point of view, he wants to make himself, an FDR or whatever. And these are the ways to get it. He doesn't care about Europe. As I said, they're weaklings. He's going to grab what he can. And, with Venezuela, he's feeling very, he's on a high. I did it. No one thought I would do this. I'm showing that I'm the madman of diplomacy. No one can guess what I'm going to do next. And maybe I can extend that. I mean, in his biography, he said, I don't think about yesterday, I don't think about tomorrow. What I think about is how to maximize today. So that's exactly how he goes about running the presidency. It's a day-by-day thing. As I said, throw out dead cats and white rabbits to keep the press out there, and then, cause chaos and commotion and see what opportunities shake out. This is what he does. All right. He threatens, cajoles, does whatever, and then he watches to see how you're reacting. If he senses any weakness, he presses. If he senses any strength and ability to push back, he then looks for something else. It's just like with China. I mean, he thought his tariffs were going to reduce China to a puddle of jelly. Well, instead, they said, look, the world's interconnected, and you're not in a position to do all this kind of isolationist stuff you want to do. And then they had a meeting in Busan, and Trump realized, okay, this isn't going the way I expected. China has things like rare earths, strategic metals, chemicals, so many things, intermediate goods that we have to have. So he kind of says, okay, we're friends. We can work this out. Right? Meanwhile, he goes back home. Well, he doesn't even, before he goes back home, before he even goes to the meeting in Busan, he gives a green light to the Japanese ambassador to violate the ambiguity. The ambiguity was always about what the US would do in terms of Taiwan, because although they agreed to there's only one China, and they signed international treaties that domestically they pass a law called the Taiwan Relations Act, which just says, well, we agreed to that, but this is a domestic law, and this governs what we can do, and China, don't pay any attention to this, but we're going to keep complete supplying them so they can repair their military structure. That was the understanding. Now it's become quite a different game. So he encourages her to violate the ambiguity. Of course, it sets off a storm. It's now costing Japan a lot. China's announced that they're not going to allow dual use or military use of strategic metals and also rare earths, which puts Japan in a very difficult position. If they extend that to the automobile industry, basically it stops. So China has a lot of controls on it. China is a huge market for Japan. They have a lot of facilities here. To lose that for a country that depends so heavily on exports would be devastating. So China has its own pressures. So then he goes back to the US, and what's the game plan? Okay, we can't attack China directly. So what we're going to do is to attack them indirectly. We're going to go to every country and say, you have to stop trading with China. And that's exactly what they're doing today. And we're going to make it stick by going down and grabbing a country like Venezuela, which has close relationships with China, where China has invested, to send them a message that you can't come to our backyard. And if you do, it's going to cost you. So, but it's all indirect. All right, he hasn't coming. So expect a direct response, though, from Beijing, which obviously is not going to allow strategic metals and rare earths to be used in the weapons that the United States wants to build, not only to sell to other countries that are antagonistic towards China, but also allowing the US to supply their stockpile of these weapons. And without these, zero. They cannot produce. All right, they can try to go through and salvage whatever they can, use what things, but it's going to run out. I mean, things like heavy magnets that are used in very delicate operations like gyroscopes and things like that, rare earth magnets. China has 98% of the market in terms of production, not in terms of the minerals. The minerals are all over the place. That is not the issue. The issue is that China has the production, and it would take the US at least 5 years and a lot of money to try to replicate what China is doing now. Meanwhile, China will continue to go forward. It would take 10 to 15 years for the US to try to come up with domestic solutions for their automobiles and things like that. Well, whether it's 5 years or 15, the fact is there would be no production during that time, or very, very limited production. And this would be a real threat to the U.S. arms industry. How do you sell things you can't make? I always laughed at the when Donald Trump says, "We're not going to sell you the avionics that you need for for your airplanes." Well, let's think about this. I'm not going to sell you the stuff we can't make. Okay, I think that's fairly obvious. But I don't think it's once again, he makes an absurd statement like this, not really working it through. And that is the real danger, that he takes a huge risk, hasn't thought it through. There's some sort of retaliation and then escalation, and then we don't know where that goes. But it's not a good place.
You mentioned something interesting. You're saying that the Japanese Prime Minister's Sanae Takaichi's provocative statement on Taiwan, which is that Japan would send its military to Taiwan in case of a conflict, you're saying that is because she received the U.S. prodding to do so, maybe not out of her own volition. So you think U.S. is behind that, behind the escalation of tensions between China and Japan?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at the timing of his visit to there. He knew he was going to Busan and that it was not going to go well. He had made stops. Vietnam. Vietnam had come to the U.S., but he had made stops in Malaysia. No, Vietnam and Malaysia he made stops in. It was Australia that you talked to before. These are the main areas where they do have some very small amount of processing of rare earths. And he was, trying to collect these little bits and pieces so he could show up in Busan and say, hey, listen, if you don't give us what we want, we'll start making them ourselves. China said, okay, it'll take you what, 5, 15 years? Okay, good luck. Good luck with that. So he knew he was going into a bad situation. So, he was looking for leverage. Donald Trump is always looking for leverage. And he'll tell you that, I got to get leverage on this guy. I have to get better cards. All right. He sees it all as a game. So, the Japanese are very careful. All right. They're not going to violate an ambiguity clause. Now, she wants to, quote, normalize Japan. And the key to normalizing Japan is getting out, having their own nuclear umbrella, in essence. And she wants to move in that direction. But I guarantee you, the moment she gets her own nuclear devices, the first thing they'll do is ask the U.S. to leave. They do not like being an occupied nation. Japan is extremely xenophobic. A lot of her popularity right now is because she's closing the door on tourism, and a lot of the Japanese people are reacting very positively. That's not the ones who run the businesses, but the people at large saying, we don't like gaijin. We don't like foreigners here. They're impure. They're dirty. They're not Japanese. So they're not somebody we can deal with. So yeah, she wanted to say something like this, but the idea that this question wasn't planted. I mean, I used to run, I was in politics myself. When I wanted something like that, I would just tell, things, this is a good question. You should think about asking that. Well, gee whiz, they ask it and then you respond. So this was calibrated. She wanted to stand up as kind of an iron britches lady like Margaret Thatcher, who she admires. And, she wanted to say to the world, look, you can't toy with Japan. We have our own agency. And it dovetails with her desire to make Japan into a, quote, normalized entity. But it brings back very bad memories for Asia as a whole. Remember, this is 80th anniversary of the end of the anti-Japanese imperialist war. I mean, fascism supposedly was defeated back then, and the hope was it wouldn't come back. And now you're starting to see it clearly coming forward in Japan, also in the United States. I mean, the only way you can describe what Donald Trump is doing is fascism. I mean, this is exactly what Germany was doing. They're saying, for our protection, we need to take over this area. For their protection, we need to take over this area. That was what it was all about. And what happened? Europe appeased. It led to war. That's where history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme.
I think I would dispute about the fascist description, because I know for a fact the train do not run on time in United States. You know that. So this is a fact.
You completely destroy my entire argument. Well, they don't run in Germany on time anymore either, apparently. But yeah, I guess I'll have to rethink that whole thing. Our trains don't run very fast, never mind on time.
Yeah.
Anyways, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I've kind of exhausted that. I mean, we know where the U.S. is and its strategy. It wants to take over all these areas, show it's strong. Trump thinks that this is the key to wooing the electorate back. But the problem is that if you can't eat, you don't really care about Venezuela or Greenland. I mean, U.S. people, you ask them where Greenland is, point to a map without things. They'll be pointing to Central Europe or something like this, or Iceland or whatever. They have no clue about geography, so it would be very, very, very difficult for them to get excited about 50,000 people in a massive ice sheet. They don't, what's shipping to them if they can't pay their bills? And this is really the ticking time clock that Trump is running against. People think about this in international terms, but in America, as we both know, all politics is local, and he has a reckoning coming up with this mid-year election. And the problem is, if he follows true to form, he's either before or after the election declare it invalid and try to say, no, we're going to keep the same slate of people. The problem is about, droves of Republicans are in fact resigning. So how do you replace them? Maybe he just says, as long as there's more Republicans than Democrats, we'll freeze it. I'm sure right now they are trying to figure out if these guys do resign, how do we keep the House? I'm sure his, Stephen Miller, who is, wow, I mean, he's something else. Did you see his statement? He says, we can do anything because we're America. I mean, this sounded something like out of, it was the movie How I Came to Love the Bomb, Dr. Strangelove. I mean, he's that guy. He's the one sitting there going, I keep my essences to myself.
His wife is the one who tweeted out with a map of Greenland painted the American color and says, "You are next. Greenland is next.
Coming soon." Yes, I mean, you really have a bunch of characters in there, but as I said, I mean, what happens if Trump becomes somewhat enfeebled? There are questions about his judgment now. Obviously, the filter. This minimal amount of filtering he had before is completely gone. He just says whatever comes to mind. But if he comes incapacitated and you have the same crew there, people should be thinking very carefully what that would mean. In essence, they could be independent actors. Rubio would get his long wish to go into Cuba and take over the government. And then declare that all the old families who lost their lands so many years ago are now back in control, and they should get interest, and basically create a serfdom society. He might be a hero to the few people in Florida left who remember the Cuban Revolution, but it certainly isn't going to solve anything. And then you have Miller pushing his right-wing, white is right agenda. I mean, he would be going off in a different direction, and there would be no controls of it. Right now, they have to bow and scrape before Donald Trump. They have to watch, make sure they don't get too much limelight, and that they always put him front and center. and that he's going to react to whatever they say. He's malleable to a point, but he's always looking at the polls. He's looking at the news, and he's with an eye towards his own glorification, making himself into the great man that he isn't but wants to be.